Hello, and welcome to another episode. So, if you may recall, I'm a big Saturn fan. And I think the biggest set of games for this particular system that you've probably heard me talk to death about by now is Panzer Dragoon. It's genuinely one of my absolute favourite series of all time. And whilst the Saturn wasn't my initial introduction, that would go to one of the later games in the series, it was certainly a real driving factor for getting this particular system. And it remains one of my absolute favourite set of games I have ever played through. So, I guess we'll go chronologically in terms of release order, just for now. So, obviously, we have the first game, the original Panzer Dragoon Saga. I mean, what can I say about this? Fantastic music, fantastic gameplay, fantastic design, world building. It's just an absolute classic and a really solid start for Sega on the Saturn. I mean, come on, ludicrously short. Unfortunately for at least, I'd say 2 in the Panzer Dragoon series, they're not very long. You can beat Panzer Dragoon 1 in about an hour if you know what you're doing. That doesn't quite go for the sequel, but certainly the first one and any re-releases they did of it, there's not a lot here. It's not, unfortunately, like, say, Star Fox, which I think was quite a big inspiration for a lot of 3D rail shooters at the time. Though this added its own twist. The ability to kind of look in all directions by pressing the shoulder buttons to kind of change angles for firing was, and still is, probably one of the best things ever added to a rail shooter. I'm growing an appreciation for rail shooters. I will probably talk about my love of Star Fox down the line, but for now, let's stick with Sega. So yeah, that's Panzer Dragoon. It was ported to other systems, including the PC. This is genuinely a nicer looking version. You'd be hard pressed to find any re-releases of this version nowadays. They're just not around, and it's kind of this version that's the basis of any other ports. So, for example, the PS2 or the original Xbox versions are ports of the original Panzer Dragoon for PC, not so the Saturn, as no doubt you've heard time and again. The Saturn is notoriously difficult to emulate, and it is notoriously difficult to port from. In fact, we'll get to that with debatably the most famous in the franchise, and one of those games that loads of people have heard of and never played. But for now, we've got Zwei. Panzer Dragoon Zwei is a real glow-up in 100,000 ways. From better bosses, it's longer, the gameplay is more refined, and you watch your dragon evolve throughout time. So he starts as this little thing down here, then he grows into this, and then finally into that. That mutation aspect does come back a couple of times. Multiple routes, multiple end bosses. Just that continuation is really what sets Zwei apart from the original. The original was probably the defining one, but Zwei is a glow up in 100,000 ways. Unfortunately, it is landlocked to the Saturn. I haven't found a port of Zwei anywhere. Nobody's ported it, which is a shame because it is such a glow up and it is such a radical evolution from the original. Infinitely more replayable as well. But you know, while I'm thinking about it, let's talk about the artwork of Panzer Dragoon 1 and Panzer Dragoons Y. It's ugly, man. It has not aged well. If you've seen the Japanese covers at all, you'll know that they are considerably more gorgeous because they decided, hey, let's not put a really ugly-ass 3D render on the front of it, and instead let's put some actual artwork. I wish they'd done that for the rest of the series, because they didn't. Oh well. It was actually around this time, however, that Sega decided to be a really good idea to create an original video animation or an OVA of Panzer Dragoon Saga. It is about half an hour long, maybe an hour. I haven't actually managed to sit through the whole thing because it is awful. The voice acting on the dub is terrible. The animation is okay, but it's not great. It's not aged well. Yeah, it's not aged well. Unfortunately, that's kind of the case for Saturn games, isn't it? They don't age super duper well. On the plus side, however, it is very exempt from that. Very exempt from bad aging. Now we get to kind of the meat and potatoes. Panzer Dragoon Saga is one of those games that hundreds of people in retro gaming or gaming in general have heard of. Always on the tail end of one of those, oh, what happened to Panzer Dragoon Saga? Like with Matt McMuscles, if you watch him, he did an entire video talking about this game's very turbulent release schedule, and a big part of me wonders if porting it to the Dreamcast would have been a better idea. However, what we got out of this is a game that rivals Final Fantasy VII. Now, I'm not a big Final Fantasy fan at all. I don't care for Final Fantasy. I never have. So, might be a tad biased when I say infinitely better than Final Fantasy VII. Largely because you're on a giant frickin' dragon flying around and doing, admittedly, still turn-based combat, but it does work in that multi-degree angle. There is a pseudo-open world there, and there are exploratory bits where you play as Edge, who's this guy, just kind of roaming around different environments, as you can see here. The battles being turn-based was an interesting idea. I don't know how well it works. If Forever Entertainment, who are the guys currently working... I think it's Forever Entertainment. It is. Forever Entertainment, who are the guys currently working on the sort of remakes, get to Saga. I'm hoping they'll lean a bit away from the turn-based combat. But that might just be personal bias. If they keep it, I'll still play them. I'll still play it. Of course I will. It's Panzer Dragoon Saga. And it tragically is a game that needs to be played by a lot more people. Unfortunately, Sega lost the source code. They would have to reprogram the entire game from the ground up, which I don't really see them doing. Unfortunately, the game did not sell well. I believe in North America they had a grand total of about 40,000 copies. Because there was an initial batch of 20,000, that sold out completely. Then they had an additional 20,000, and that was it. And this was in 1998, the year before the Dreamcast launched. The Saturn, unfortunately, despite being one of my favourite consoles, was in its death throes. It was thrashing about, looking for some kind of saving grace, and unfortunately, as amazing as this game is, which is very... It couldn't reach those heights. That being said, that game remains tippy top of my collection. I got it about nearly 10 years ago, actually. I haven't actually played all the way through it. I've been meaning to, but I don't want to break it because it's so freaking expensive. That being said, my mother got it for me for my birthday that year, about 9 years ago. In the year prior, however, we bought what we thought was a copy of it for 60 quid. Which we were like, yay, it's on Amazon, it's £60, that's ridiculous. It was a manual. So I paid her back for that, and 140 quid later, Panzer Dragoon Saga. But it has shot up astronomically in price since then. 140 quid back in 2014 was a lot of money, but that's a lot more. That's a lot more. Like, that is it's so much more. It has been kind of taking a bit of a nosedive recently, which is nice for people looking to get into it, but if you can get it, I'd say get the emulation version. As much as I would be linchpinned for such a thing. It's not the only ludicrously expensive game in the Panzer Dragoon series, though. That would also go to Panzer Dragoon Mini, unfortunately. Now, Mini wasn't developed by the core team who developed these Saturn games, which was Team Andromeda, headed by... I want to say it's Yukio Futatsugi. He's a guy who's also worked on a whole host of other games, including Phantom Dust, which has a very small but very, very dedicated fan base. Couldn't quite get into it as much as I could with Panzer Dragoon Saga. Definitely a game I need to go back. Definitely a game I need to go back to, especially considering it's now free on Xbox One and Series X, I believe, with full-blown online support, which is nuts. Unfortunately, Panzer Dragoon hasn't really gotten that treatment. Most it got was a port to the PS2 as part of the Sega Ages 2500 line. I wouldn't be able to tell you too much about this. I believe it's the PC version, but I don't have a Japanese PlayStation. So, unfortunately, that's just kind of one I bought for the sake of it. It used to be called Will of the Ancients, but Panzer Dragoon Legacy is kind of the hub of Panzer Dragoon fans and content and whatever on the internet. And I'm really hoping they're watching this because I really like your stuff. Learned a lot about it. Learned a lot about this. That's why I bought it. Really in-depth lore throughout the entire series. Saga is probably the one that builds the most upon it because it's a 20-hour-long RPG as opposed to a 2 to 5 hour-long rail shooter. But in doing so, it led on to, unfortunately, the final game of the series, chronologically, which is Orta. This was produced by Smilebit and published by Sega, but also Infogrames had a hand in it. If you know anything about Infogrames, they are currently Atari, as well as Hasbro Interactive and GT Interactive and a lot of other interactives, all kind of fused into a hideous malformed conglomerate in the form of that. But it's weird to think that Infogrames has, or Atari had a hand in the Panzer Dragoon series. But yeah, this is kind of the final evolution that started with Zwei. In here we've got far more cinematic elements. We've got a more in-depth story than Zwei. Not as much as Saga, unfortunately. Saga got a bit meta towards the end, though. I won't spoil it. But this one doesn't really capitalise on those meta elements, unfortunately. What it does capitalise on is an absolute bucket load of content. So, when you first boot this up, you've only got the initial one. You've only got the initial campaign, and then you have Pandora's Box. Now, Pandora's Box is something that kind of came back to the series way down the line, but this was, I believe, the first one. Though Pandora's Box might precede it. Basically, that had music tracks, concept art, films, that sort of thing. Fully playable alternative levels where you play as like different characters, including like an Imperial boy who's like 10, I think. And you play as this dude called, you know what, his name escapes me, but he's one of the worm riders who ride big old worms. And I think he's blue. Again, if I remember correctly. It's been a hot minute since I played Orta. But, yeah. The major thing, though, it comes with the original. It comes with the PC port. And rather nicely, if you leave your Xbox on for 20-ish hours, it automatically unlocks all content, because content unlocking is based on time. You can unlock it like normally, but it's time locked as well. So after a set amount of time of just leaving it on the main menu, it unlocks everything, which is great. Unfortunately, that was it. That was it for Panzer Dragoon for 2003. Panzer Dragoon Auto came out in 2003. It is 20 years old. That's fine. But it took about 17 for any kind of rebirth, or should I say remake. This is the limited run version. I believe Forever Limited have like a special edition. I've kind of got my eyes on, but we'll see. I've got the game, so what's the point? Forever Entertainment added in like some additional modes, 7 levels. You can beat this in an hour. It's unfortunately got the content problem of the original. That being said, about 2 years ago there was a bit of hope as far as Panzer Dragoon went. We had 3 games announced. We had Remake 1, Remake 2, or Zwei Remake, and a VR game called Panzer Dragoon Voya Wreckage, or Panzer Dragoon VR. Unfortunately, we've heard nothing about Zwei since then. Forever Entertainment are currently doing a bunch of front mission remakes, which is fine if you like front mission. I've never really been into it. Though to be fair, my only touch base with that particular franchise was Evolved, and no, bad game. I'm hoping Zwei will get its remake soonish. It would have been nice to hear about it through what I'm going to just dub E3 time, but we didn't, unfortunately. I'm hoping that we would have heard about it at Limited Run Games' release thing, but again, that whole presentation was just kind of boring. Didn't have Panzer Dragoon, which is a shame. However, there will hopefully be some more games in the future. I'm planning on getting Mini as a kind of homebrew one, because I don't see the point in wasting £400 or dollars or whatever currency you've got out there to get a game that, quite frankly, is 20 minutes long. 400 quid is a step too far, and I've spent some ludicrous money on games that are short that I can think of that I won't name, but not that much, and not for that little. So yeah, I'll probably see if I can get a repro of it. Hopefully we'll hear more on Voyage Record, and yeah. So that's it, guys. That's the Panzer Dragoon games. All of my Panzer Dragoon games. But yeah, it's a fantastic series, and if you're going to check out any website to do with Panzer Dragoon, it's panzerdragoonlegacy.com. Wonderful community over there. Really good, really solid wiki about everything story-wise. So yeah, make sure to check it out. Check out any other playthroughs, and check out more of my videos, because I like views on my videos. Anyway, thank you guys. Until next time.